Why are we all here? And why are you learning from a guy like me, whose name is usually Deviant nowadays, much to my mother's chagrin? How many people have ever picked a lock before? Oh, wow, that's not a lot of hands. That is completely going to change tonight. Excellent, excellent. So, who am I and what do I do? Well, you heard some of that, right? I have a computer consulting firm that turned into a physical consulting firm. We teach people, we lecture, we give a lot of good information to people who want to know how easy it is to break into their security. Sometimes we try to encourage better security practices by educating others on nights like tonight, or by running trainings, or just by doing consulting on site. Other times, when you have people who just kind of don't want to believe their security could be that bad, as people at LMG will tell you, there's nothing like a good audit of their facility, a nice red team test to convince them of that. And we had probably the best story that we always illustrate this by is a client says, they think their data is secure, they've tried to do best practices and this and that, and if they hire a firm like, for example, LMG might try to pop the network, get in remotely, take over the controller, exfiltrate data. We had a job similar to that. We broke into their dev lab and data center, unracked a server, and just walked out with it because the front door is often the weakest link in a lot of systems. If you can physically get to the data, that is it. That is the ball game right there. So that's why we like to talk about things like this. And we also do it because it's fun. There's a whole culture just called lock sport, or competitive and hobbyist lock picking. Many of us are part of that community. I sit on the board of directors for Tool, which is a 501c3 that just does public outreach and education. We show up at universities. We show up at conferences. This is LockCon, the big annual lock picking competition where people from all around the world get together. The co-owner of Core, Bavik, is in the corner, looking very intently at Manfred, the German champion. And we had the honor of being turned into a comic recently, so my life's feeling pretty good about that. It's a fun field to be in, I don't deny it. The idea of breaking into buildings at night just because you were asked to and can never possibly go to jail. It's got its moments, I will tell you that. So why do these locks matter to us? Why do you care about what I'm trying to say? Well, we already kind of made the case for those of you who are here with HTCIA, etc. You can do everything right on your network. And if a company like mine is tasked with trying to break in, I'm literally going to walk up to this device, throw console cables into everything I see, and drop to single user mode or just start changing firewall routes. If there's a big push now, especially a lot of our clients in journalism and such, they say, we're so concerned about eavesdropping, we want to communicate securely with our sources, and we just paid all this money for a new phone system where there's crypto and voice over IP, and I say, that's probably great. There's probably also a room like this in the basement where all that copper comes trunking down. And what kind of lock is literally on this door that no one goes to? If I can get in that room and I can just clip right in, start listening to phone calls. So we always remind people that you can do everything right from the perspective of your InfoSec architecture and your infrastructure, but it gets undermined by the wrong person buying something at Home Depot. And beyond that, though, locks hold a very special place in our world. The idea of the lock sport community and the hobbyist lock picker community, people are just fascinated by locks and keys. You may have even seen, tokens and trinkets and jewelry. They're not functional locks, but locks just resonate with us in a very visceral way. They appeal to our sense of self and our sense of personal property and our sense of privacy. A friend of mine named Skylar makes a really cool example of this, talking about a hypothetical door. And I want to take you on kind of an imaginary journey right now. You are going to meet with someone, and you're supposed to be meeting this person. You're maybe seeing an apartment you need to rent, or it's a professor with office hours, and you need to go visit him or her. You're going to someone else's place, and they're expecting you to arrive, but you arrive before they do. And you call them up, and you say, hey, are you here? I'm leaving you this voicemail. Maybe I beat you here. You stuck in traffic? Let's say the place you arrive, it is literally a door hanging open, just like this. What do? Do you go in? Do you maybe at least stick your head in, kind of peer, hey, are you here? You're knocking on the door frame. What if the door is shut? Do you do the same thing? Do you just open the door? Maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't. Every situation's different. If you're seeing that apartment I said, maybe you know it's vacant. You're well, I'm supposed to be here. Maybe you're the type who opens the door. Maybe you're not. But what if that door has a lock? Instantly that door means something different. And even if you're literally on the phone with someone And you're like, hey, I got here before you. Are you around? And they say, oh yeah, the rock is like under, in the garden. Look for the key under that. Maybe there's some people who probably are so into people's personal space that on the phone they're like, how far? You're like 5 minutes? I'll just wait for you. I don't want to open that door. Because the lock means something to us. And Skylar wraps it up by saying, now imagine that door is hanging open, but it literally is a door with a lock that's installed in it. And whether you are the type to go through the door or not, I guarantee you that door means something different than this door, just because the lock was there. And that's what locks mean to us, and that's why we find them fascinating, and that's why we like to explore them. We treat them as puzzles to be solved and dissected, if you've ever been into like brain teasers. And the community as a whole is a great one. We really enjoy it. We pick a lot of locks in meetings and public places. We have contests. You can win prizes at various HackerCons. And if you get really into it, the top tier competitors do come from around the world once a year. This year, in fact, it is being held not too far from here in Seattle. It's usually in the Netherlands. But LockCon is once a year where the best lockpickers in the world all get together, and it's an amazing time. But let's get a little more simple for a second. Many people will dismiss the topic of lockpicking, especially from a security perspective. When you start to explain, you say, well, what if someone picks your locks? You should maybe consider this better lock. I just learned about locks. A lot of times, especially, unfortunately, in the business world, you'll get people saying things like, why do we want to spend more on locks? There's glass windows right here. Someone could just throw a brick. And if you ever seen like a nice, beautiful, public-facing server room, like with big glass walls and all the blinky lights and nice, perfectly tied back wires, I've literally had clients that have said, we're not going to upgrade that lock. Come on, don't you see this is glass? Someone could heave one of these chairs right through the plain glass. Okay. Let me give you an old story that hopefully illustrates this modern story and how it applies. In the old Marine culture, when sailors in the merchant marines and sailors in all sort of walks of the Navy kept their personal effects in, their sail bag, when you would put into port, and we're talking 18th, 19th century, sailors would always make sure to tie their bag off with a reef knot or a square knot. If anyone was ever in Scouts, the simple square knot, over, under. Very, very basic, right? As opposed to, this is like an outdoorsy community, right? Who can tell me what this is? It's not a square knot, right? What is it? It's a granny knot. Sailors would always tie their effects bags with a reef knot, not because it's a particularly great knot, it won't self-cinch, but if a thief went into the bag, stole something, because there were people coming on and off the boats back then. They're moving material on and off, they're moving goods. If a sailor came back to his or her bag and they said, whoa, this is not a reef knot, they would instantly know somebody's probably been in here, and it's not me, it's not one of my fellow people on the ship. And they would, before they put out to sea, they'd say, hey, who's trying to sell my whatever down on the dock? Criminals got wise to that. Criminals started to learn how to tie a reef knot. It's not a hard knot to tie, just over, under. So sailors started tying this. That is not a reef knot. That is a thief knot. Now, interestingly enough, hopefully our camera will work here on the other screen as well. If I whip this together and tell me if I'm on camera, does that look like a square knot? Right? But the lead ends, the working ends are coming off the wrong angles. It is not a square knot. It's actually virtually impossible to tie that knot by accident. You have to manually take a bite of rope and manually feed through, feed around. Sailors would tie a thief knot, not because they thought it was impenetrable. It's just a knot. But even though, like the plain glass window, if somebody smashes it, if somebody unties it, the sign is there for you. The knot acts like a seal. They would instantly be able to tell, oh, wait, whoa, this is a reef knot. Someone thinks they're tricky. They're not tricky. I know someone's been in here. Using good locks forces people to do something destructive to get in. And if you force an attacker to be destructive, hopefully you will notice it. Hopefully you'll be able to respond correctly. That's why we want to talk about picking. We want to talk about some of the covert tactics. If you deny an attacker a covert path of entry, you leave them nothing but a choice to expose themselves. And hopefully that's kind of can resonate with you there. So we had a couple of hands when I asked if you've done any lockpicking. We're diving right into it, and we're going to then spend the whole evening just doing hands-on fun. If you've never tried this, let's talk about it. Let's talk about locks that we use every day. Here is a locking doorknob. Here is a padlock kind of hanging on its side on a hasp. Here's a deadbolt mortised into a wall. Every one of these locks in these pictures, they look very different externally. Their form factors are rather different, but they are actually all the exact same mechanism. Virtually all of the locks we use, particularly here in North America, are the same mechanism physically. They're what's called a pin tumbler design. It's been around for a very long time. Even in its current form, its so-called modern form, it's well over 100 years old. And you're probably familiar with this. I mean, there's a housing which fits a plug, that is the round part that turns when you operate the lock. If you look down the keyway, which will have its own unique shape due to warding on the edges, you'll be able to see a little bump of metal. And we'll flip to the webcam again in a minute. You'll be able to see a small piece of metal. And again, in addition to that, there's a warding, there's a natural profile shape that every brand of lock will have. But what you're not seeing, and what we can look at on the inside here, there are other pins in the lock. Many people are aware, either from the name pin tumbler lock or from kind of looking at the lock, you see a little pin doing something. What you saw from the outside was that key pin. The driver pin, shown in blue in our diagrams here, that is what's holding your lock shut most of the time. And of course, on the outside here, you can't usually see the driver pin is kind of up in the housing or shell. But that driver pin, along with a spring above it, what we would call the pin stack, when left at its default rest position, the driver pin is blocking the rotation of the plug. So you can't get that plug, you can't just stick anything in the lock, get the plug to turn. The driver pin is blocking or binding. And this holds true no matter which way the lock is mounted or facing. You saw that padlock, right? It was kind of sideways. If you're from Europe or you go to Europe extensively, you'll know that this looks much more familiar to the people in many countries in Europe. They mount their locks this direction. It's very interesting at that LockCon event where there's locksmiths from around the world. Locksmiths love to just say top pin and bottom pin, this and that, when they're talking about their supply kits. Well, if you're talking to a fellow in Germany and someone else is from Chicago, a top pin and a bottom pin are not the same thing. But we could say key pin, driver pin, spring in this pin stack. The lock doesn't care which way it's facing. No key in the lock, the default at-rest position prevents the plug from turning. So what if you do have the right key? The operation of a lock, you've done it every day. It is push the pins, then turn the plug. You push the pins by inserting the key. The blade of the key pushes the key pin, which pushes the driver pin. You want to get that shear line between the two pins at the edge of the plug. You push the pins and turn. Mechanically, does this make sense? All right, nice clear diagrams. That is basically the only thing happening inside of your locks, day in and day out. I say basically because if we kind of swing to the side view, it's not a single pin stack in your locks. That would be pretty weak security. It's a series of them. But they all work the same way. Every single pin stack has a key pin, a driver pin, and a spring. A key pin, a driver pin, and a spring. And those different key pins, those red pins, just happen to be varying in height because that is what corresponds to the cuts on the blade of your key. That's called the bitting of the key, if you're curious. And if the bitting cuts are all correct, when the key rides, it's push the pins, then turn. That's mechanically the only thing going on inside your locks when you operate them. Does this diagram also make sense? Okay, you now fundamentally understand 90% of the locks you've ever used. There's not a lot of variation going on. Here we have one pin stack, and this key cut is a little too deep. This one pin stack, a little too low, right? Well, we would say low in the US, and in Europe, of course, it would be the other way around. But that driver pin is just not quite cleared. It's not quite high enough. It's not at the edge of the plug. The same would hold true if the cut was too shallow on the blade of the key. Again, this is what we would call the number 2 position. Usually when discussing a key, we speak of the head of the key, the shoulder, and then you would count going out to the tip. So this is the first position, the second, the third, the fourth. Most conventional locks you use are 5 pins. That's a pretty average number. But in the second position here, the cut is too shallow. The red pin, the key pin, is now jammed up at the edge of the plug. That'll bind just as effectively as a driver pin would. So this will not work either. You have to be, it's very Goldilocks. It's got to be just right. Another point to consider, the pins themselves are not, what's up, buddy? Are not exactly what's holding the lock together. They're not exactly, the pins are not keeping, let's say, the shackle of a padlock retained. Lock's pins are not keeping a door shut. We'll talk about this a little bit later with some bypassing attacks. But for example, these are all padlocks sitting on a board. And those of you who are outdoorsy types will recognize this is at the wrong end of a firing range to be standing when lead starts flying. But we run a large shooting event just prior to DEF CON every year in Las Vegas. We go out in the desert. And one year my buddy Steve brought out some locks. And he starts throwing 308 downrange. And he's pretty sharp at it, actually. He's really good at it. So we brought a lot of ordnance that year, actually. A lot of people started firing at these locks. But I'm pretty sure it was Steve who picked a few of them really nicely. And here he is. He's, blasted right into these. Look at really nice shot with his foul rifle. He not only punches it right where the pin stack would be, but he blows the entire core of the lock right out. But is the lock shut? It's still shut, right? The lock is being retained shut by a shackle and some latches up here. Well, if that's what's holding this latch, this shackle shut, the latches are, why attack the pins and the plug and everything else when you can just go around? That's the principle of bypassing. That's why, although as you've seen in those commercials in the 80s, the tough under fire master lock, everybody is able to either pick this lock or just shim it open relatively easily, even though bullets, don't pop it open. But let's get back to picking because you're all eager to try that. Inside of a lock, we've now seen it from the side view. This is kind of a top view over here. Imagine this is the plug that we're looking down from above, like we've stripped the lock apart. All of those holes, those are the chambers that are drilled into the plug during manufacturing. They're all the same diameter because the pins are all the same diameter. They're all lined up. Can you folk read on the slide what it says in yellow on all these pins? What does it say? Bind. Imagine you're trying to turn this plug with no key in it. Those pins, they're all at the wrong height, so they would all ostensibly be binding. They would all be hitting or binding or blocking. But it says at the top, this is in a perfect world. We don't live in a perfect world. We live in a world where mass-produced goods come from factories, many times overseas, always at the lowest bidder, and somebody is mass assembling a machined part that is not going to be precision engineered. It just has to be good enough to work. This is a brand new lock, stripped apart, photographed up close. So here we have those pin chambers do not, you act like this is bad, but like you ever try to drill into a curved surface? Do that 1,000 times an hour, you are now a lock factory. The pins inside of the lock, they're nicely, beautifully cylindrical in my diagrams, but in the real world, pins have some irregularity, they have some blemishing and pitting and scarring. All of these little imperfections in a pin tumbler lock means that this is much more like reality. Can you see the difference even in the back? Do you see those pin chambers? They're not perfectly true. The pins themselves are not perfectly the same shape every time all the way down. If you have slight imperfection in this lock, as you do in all locks, the idea of trying to turn with no key in it does not actually bind every single driver pin simultaneously. It's like if you put a bunch of people in formation, but they're kind of raggy as a line, they're not really lined up perfectly, and you say walk forward if there's a big table in front of them, one person is going to hit that table before anyone else does if they started off a little bit out of alignment. That's what happens inside of a lock whenever you try to manipulate it. Not every driver pin is going to bind or grab at the same time. And this is what allows us to use pick tools. We talked about operating a lock with a key. It's push the pins, then turn. The only thing with lock picking is you just reverse that. You turn first and then try to push the pins. And you use some special tools to do it. This is a lock pick. This is a very basic hook-shaped lock pick. It's kind of what you may have seen, if you've never even done lock picking, maybe you've seen it in the movies. Like, that looks like a lock pick, right? It looks like the kind of thing an actor or actress has in CSI or James Bond films. This is also essential for lock picking. You are far less likely to see this in Hollywood productions. This is the turning tool, and it is just as essential because we talked about just then. You have to turn and then manipulate the pins. Using these two tools, and we'll show you some more diagrams in a minute, this is all you do. Try to turn. There's a pin binding somewhere, right? Like the driver pin that's the furthest one over is hitting and binding. If you push underneath the driver pin that is binding, if you push that pin stack, you have to eventually get to the right height. It is in a chamber. These pins can only go one way. You will eventually reach the right height that the proper key would have raised the pins anyway. When you do, that pin stack is no longer binding. Now, the lock won't open yet. There's many pins in the lock. But do you see what you've done? not only have you gotten this driver pin out of the way, but a tiny lip right here will hold the driver pin up and out of the way as long as you maintain that gentle turning pressure. From the side, this is picking. One tool goes in, the turning tool, little turning pressure on the lock. Now a pin is binding, you don't know where, you have to find it. Here we see using a hook pick to reach in, you're just fishing around, feeling how the pin stacks behave. And maybe one pin stack feels like there's a little more friction. Maybe you even hear a slight click. Awesome, you probably found a pin that was binding. No longer is. Keep hunting around. Oh, this one feels a little stiff. Click. So in a world where you're sort of blind with your eyes, but you can see with your hands, this is picking. It's reaching around and exploring, finding the difference between loose and binding. And if you feel a binding, you click. And this 5-pin lock is now only being held shut by 2 pins. Let's keep exploring that, and that feels pretty loose. Oh, this one, that feels kind of tight. Click. Now it's only 1 pin. When you finally get down to the last pin, you think what happens then? Boom. That is all lockpicking is, in a nutshell. Instead of push and turn, it's turn, then push. And you can all do this. Remember the turning tools. A lot of people, when they first, we spread all the locks out, they just grab the cool-looking lock picks because they look more awesome. The turning tool is essential, and I'm going to give you a few tips with it. Even if it didn't say at the top of this slide, bad turning tool usage, a few of you might recognize, because if you stay up late and watch TV, anyone in a TV commercial in black and white is always doing it wrong. So this person is not correct. Are you tired of your locks not opening? So yeah, this person has sort of thrown a finger over the turning tool and is hooking with it. I don't find that to be as soft and gentle and precise as pushing with the tip of your finger, because your use of that turning tool is incredibly light. Your fingertip should always be fingertip colored. It shouldn't discolor. And we could look at this and be like, look at that dummy. But you press your finger. It doesn't take a lot to make your fingertip not look flesh color. The amount of pressure on a turning tool can be thought of as akin to pushing a key on like a membrane keyboard. That's the enough pressure. Imagine stacking a few coins, like balancing them on the tool. That's enough pressure. Very, very light pressure is all you need. The less pressure, the better. There are all different sizes and styles of turning tool, but you can think of them in 2 broad categories. Standard or edge of the plug turning tools. They will insert away from the pins, way down here at the edge of the plug. That is usually a longer headed turning tool that will reach further into the keyway. It'll achieve a pretty nice bite into that keyway. You will compromise your workspace a little bit, but as long as the keyway is big and wide enough, you can still get picks in there. In the American market, our keyways, you could drive a truck through them compared to the European keyways of the world. The only real problem is if your turning tool slips way down and starts scraping along the edge. How do you solve that? Well, you take a thicker turning tool. There's all different thicknesses and sizes of turning tools. So this one is slipping around, but a really fat one sticks in the keyway. Now, of course, you can't get the pins. Maybe I flip it the other way. That looks pretty good. You're always picking kind of the biggest turning tool you can that will lock into the keyway, but still leave you enough room to work. Speaking of enough room to work, smaller headed turning tools, ones with tiny tips, those are designed to insert right in the middle of the plug. Some locks, you simply need all this space to get your pick tools in. Now, this won't achieve as good of a purchase in the keyway. It might bounce out on you, but it gives you more room to work. So it's a balancing act. When we spread the locks out, I'm going to give you a few introductory things to try. The biggest number of locks we have with us that we'll share with everyone are these what we call progressive cylinders. Look across them, find the low-numbered cylinders, like lock number 1, let's say. It literally has 1 pin stack in it. It's a great look for the lower numbers to start out. It will be easier to try this tactic. You'll be able to build. It's like, it's building your way up slowly. By the way, all of these lock cylinders, the front face is where you want to stick all your tools in. You do not want to do anything with the tail cap. You don't want to unscrew the tail cap or take it apart. Usually when we have big public villages, by the end of the day, at least 3 locks are in pieces, and I'm like, what happened in here? And someone's like, oh, no, it just came that way. Yeah, don't take the locks apart, please. I mean, Mark and I could repin them, but we don't want to do that. If you're holding the lock in your bare hands, we have some vices if you really want to mount them up and look right into forward. But most people just hold locks in their hands. Keep in mind that tail cap is important. So while you're holding the lock and stabilizing it, don't pinch the tail cap in your hands. You won't actually be, you're actually holding the plug at that point. You're not allowing the plug to turn. So just keep it gentle. use a turning tool. There we go. I can even do a little demo for you on camera here, just so you know we're not making this up. It's not complete, hooey, the idea of being able to pick locks open quickly and easily. So here we have these are pulled right out of conventional doors. I'm going to pull a couple of picks here and here. And there are my turning tools. Am I still on camera? All right, so that lock's open. That's not too hard. A technique I'm about to show you with a different style of tool that doesn't look like the other ones you saw, this wavy-headed tool. There's a technique called raking. That's even faster. We'll talk about why some techniques are faster than others or how different tools can be employed. But when you're starting out, why do I love that first, number one cylinder? Well, we talked about how picking is this hunting around, trying to find what's the binding pin? Does this feel different than this one? If you stick a lock pick in with no turning tool, you can feel the springiness in that pin stack, then put a turning tool in, you have a binding pin, and there's no guesswork, like which one's the binding pin. It's the only pin stack in this lock. Put your pick tool back in, not only will it open easily, but hopefully it will feel differently. You can reset it, try it again with less turning pressure. It'll amaze you how little turning pressure you need to still feel that friction. Whether you're directly lifting or rocking lifting, those techniques are fine, whatever works for you and is comfortable in your hands. I did say there are some other tools. There's also some common mistakes I want to cover before we get into the other tools. Understand that when you set a pin, and you probably saw this in the other animation, the driver pin stays up. The key pin will move freely. And if you move your picks away, like some people look into the lock and they're just like, oh, the pins keep falling down. Or alternately, someone will come up to it and say, I got all the pins jammed up, they're not moving, but this isn't opening. Well, they smushed everything too far. They basically did this. This is someone starting out the right way, and then you'll see something go wrong. So this person says, all right, I understand this picking. I'm feeling this is pretty loose. Okay, that's not too bad. Oh, I got a tight one here. Let me follow. Click. All right, I'm going along great. How about this one? That's pretty loose now. Nothing happening there. This one, I feel a little, okay, click. And this person gets so excited, it's so happy that they're picking, that's all of a sudden, what happened there? Well, they've overset. Is that red pin coming down for anything? Not now. The only way to get that back down is to release your pressure, let everything drop back down. You don't want to jam things so high up. That's usually more of a problem with rocking. I mean, I tend to do rocking technique mostly. But just be mindful of it. Be light. Be gentle. Some other tools. Not all tools look like little hooks. You saw me using the rake. The squiggly tip shaped tools, those are designed to touch multiple pin stacks at once. And then because you're touching more than one pin stack at once, you're not sort of deliberately saying, am I working the first pin? Now I'll try the second pin. You're just trying to hit all the pins as rapidly as you can and get lucky. Kind of lower quality locks, cheaper locks will tend to rake open very easily if you get lucky. If you're a computer person, it's like fuzzing the lock. It's like just throwing a lot of random data at it and seeing what falls out. There's also the half diamond. A lot of people like to keep a half diamond in their kit. It fits in tiny spaces very well and tight keyways. Here you can lift with it. You can kind of rake with it, or you might even say shovel with it. Other people love a half diamond because it is the only tool in your kit probably that has a flat edge all the way out to the tip. If you invert a half diamond and try to lift up those pins, this will not open the lock, but slowly extracting it, it will allow you to count the pins because you'll actually hear them click, click, click as they're dropping off the tip of that tool. Let me pull a half diamond over here and let me grab one of these. And maybe in the front row, if I shut my loud mouth, some people can tell me. How many pins? This one had 6. And yet it just opened as easily as you saw. So when you try this, relax, relax, relax. Less pressure. Always, always remember, less pressure on the turning tool than you think you need, less pressure on the lifting pick than you think you need. And when you get a lock open, say, open, so that everyone around you knows that you got it open. And I know you got something open. And I know that I'm teaching you something up here. There are a few other things I want to cover, and then we'll go into this interesting rolling evening where you pick a little and you look a little and we go up here a little and I show you some other stuff. Some locks are harder to pick than others. There are pick-resistant locks out there, and they're not that complicated from an engineering perspective. Two things that manufacturers will do to make locks harder to pick. One, change the keyway. I mentioned that in Europe, a lot of the keyways are tighter, more narrow, more just not as much room in the keyway. If you get a keyway that's really aggressively angled, not only does it make it harder for someone to make blanks, it's your particular brand of blank, but it's a lot harder to get tools in there. Like, this is a real keyway. It's a very expensive lock. It's harder to engineer. That's a Gege brand lock from Austria. But it's a very nice, robust defense against some picking. Much more common than changing the shape of the keyway is changing the shape of the pins, though. Here we have what's called a spool pin. The driver pin is not perfectly cylindrical. It has a little lip. Now, if this pin is left alone, if you're just doing push with a key, then turn, this pin doesn't care at all. But if you turn before you've pushed, you can see the idea is it'll kick over, it'll expose a small lip, and that might jam up or hang up when someone's trying to pick. Is it impossible to pick? No. If that is jammed over at the lip, you can still push extra hard underneath, and because of that gap, it wants to occlude that gap shut. You will actually get the plug to what's called back rotate just slightly. You can see the black lines, the indicator lines. Maybe some other pins you've set are now falling down and it gets frustrating, but you can kind of go back, do your work again. It's usually considered possible. And most people in this room could probably get a spool pin lock open with about 1 or 2 hours of practice and training. Maybe by the end of the night, some of you are going to get some of them open. And manufacturers have been making custom-shaped driver pins for a very long time. This is the same idea, a mushroom pin. It will drag with more friction but still have that lip. Serrated pins just have cuts all down them. They jam up a lot harder. And you can take this to extremes. There's a company in Sweden, ASA. They're now part of the ASA Abloy group. They do a double spool kind of pin with this counter milling in the plug for lockup. Way more expensive, but still very, very good design. Are most, quote, pick-resistant locks impossible to get through? Not impossible. Maybe some of you will get through some of them tonight. But we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about other things like combination locks, bumping attacks. We have a lot of fun things to cover. But I don't want to just be staring at you while you stare at me. I want to bring that middle switch over back there. Let's bring the lights back up. Let's let people try a few things. And I think I also smell the food that arrived. We'll keep rolling through this whole evening. There's a whole lot more to cover, and I hope you're enjoying it thus far. Are there any questions thus far? Or is the question, can I please eat and play with things? Why don't you guys go ahead and get anything that, is the food here? Is that what we're, I don't know what I'm smelling. I'm just hallucinating. It totally does. Someone's faking me out. There are cookies and beer. Content yourself with that while we spread out some things for you to play with. So combination locks. The classic, gym locker lock, right? The epitome of a lock in this, it's the kind of thing that you see on website logos where you put your password in, right? It looks like it's like what we think of as a lock. It's the most popular lock in this country. This lock provides effectively no security. When we say, if you're using a standard dial combination lock, you're basically doing this. You're basically saying, please, I would like my stuff to be here when I get back. Why is that? Well, it has to do with what you're seeing here. These are padlock shims. Padlock shims are tools used by locksmiths to quickly spring a lock open without attacking the actual pins or the combination numbers. Remember that footage from the gun range out in the desert? Why attack the pins when you could just attack the shackle? This is attacking the shackle. So these little shims are designed to slip down inside the shackle, again, like inside the body of the lock, because when you use a combination lock, let me flip to my camera here for a second. If you are using a combination lock and you want to actually lock it up, if it was open and you wanted to close it, would you have to actually manipulate the numbers? Do you have to enter your combination, or do you just slap it shut? Right. You just slap it shut. The latch inside of here is a spring-loaded latch, and that just pushes out of the way. It says, oh, the shackle is coming down. I better spring out of the way. Well, if it's just a spring-loaded lever, it doesn't matter what pushes on it. So I can go ahead and take some metal from a beer can, and you can see, I'm going to duck down so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm just going to take some can metal, some little nippers here on my mini Leatherman tool. I'm going to cut a special shape. And then I'll show you on the slides what's actually being done here. So here I have just a piece of metal, right? And this lock is locked. Let me fold that metal over a little here. Let me fold that metal over a little bit here. Bend it into shape. And then if I drive this down into the lock, I might get lucky and pop that open. This was literally free. Like, this is garbage. And I can pop this lock open. And that is all because, if you can see it on the camera, let me know. Do you see the little spring-loaded bar? I'm just pushing that bar out of the way by slipping something down into the lock body. So conventional locksmith shims, they work great. I make mine out of beer cans. They work just as far. I think they even slip in a little better. They're thinner. They get into tighter spaces. Not going to last you forever, but, drink another beer. You make another 5 of them right there. If you want to try that, I've pre-cut some, and I have other cans that we can try to play with. There's some combo locks up here. We can spread them around. When you try this, when you slip that down into the lock, it's the nose of the shim goes in my experience. I go down the outside. I pinch those wings together to give it some strength and rigidity, and you want to spin that around and drive it down. You see that not only did these wings swing out over here, but look how much lower in the lock the shim is. You really want to drive that shim deep down into the lock. Let me do that one more time, because this kind of never gets old. It's actually a lot of fun. And then here's some pre-cut shim metal. We can cut some more later as needed. When
all of us young people take care of a bottle. That's a security.
That's exactly, yes. You gotta get to. There's no recycling in this town. People don't get the aluminum, I guess. So this is that little M shape that I was cutting out. And if you go on YouTube, look for beer can padlock shim. There's plenty of people, me among them, with videos talking about this weakness. So I fold once down from the top, and then these little bits at the sides, I just fold them up and around just to get them out of the way. And there you have it. When you're looking at any of these locks, looking at the dial, the left side is where we're shimming. The right side is nothing. So just like you saw in the diagrams, the shim kind of gets seated. Pinch those wings together. And some people will kind of get on this with a thumb and really dig down and push hard as they are spinning it around. And if you think you've got it, this one might have slipped in all the way, or it might have jammed up on me. If you think you've got it, don't pull up on the shim. Just leave it alone. Just pull right up on the shackle, and that should work. And you can already see, this is not a perfect tool. We're losing pieces of metal in the thing there. But that's fine. It's the ultimate in just kind of homebrew attacks. And if it works, great. A lot of these locks, by the way, where's my mouse? A lot of these, these simple, easy to shim locks, Master Lock has changed the design. They've made that latch, that spring-loaded latch, they've made it narrower, and they've made this sort of little jagged shape, just in general to interfere with slipping simple shims in. We've still gotten them to work. You can look on YouTube for anti-shim padlock shimmed, and you'll see it still kind of works for us half the time. But they've tried. At least Master is trying something. In my opinion, that's not good enough when better designs exist. I'll show you some. Here's a fun homebrew shim story, by the way. Friends of ours, U-Haul trailer, they're moving across country. They actually stopped at DEF CON on the way, and they were at DEF CON with all their stuff outside the Alexis Park. And I don't know if you can see what they did here. This is the kind of padlock, it's called a break-free shackle, where the entire lock body can come off of the shackle. When they slapped it back shut, they were a little not paying attention. This is the keyway up here, so that's no good. But it's DEF CON, right? So we had the right supplies. So we didn't even have time. I was like, they pulled me out of a pool. I'm dripping wet. I got no knife or anything on me. But I finished, a Guinness, and I kind of crumpled the can in my hands and crunched it around as best I could. And we jammed it and swished it around. We got it to work. It was ugly as heck. But, we were able to shim it. Almost any simple latched style padlock can be shimmed but this style lock cannot. This is a double ball mechanism. This is a cammed control cylinder in the middle that has to turn, enabling these two solid steel balls to fall inward. That is a proper padlock. That is unshimmable, that is nice, it's robust. Doesn't mean it's going to be expensive. You can find really cheap Junko padlocks. You can see this double ball right here, or you can see on the packaging. This is an Argentine, lock that didn't cost a whole lot, but sure enough, double ball mechanism, stainless steel. The pins weren't great. We could still pick them. But at least it's a simple enough technique. It's something that exists if you want to have a combination lock, you can still have one, but look for one that's not just a spring-loaded lever. That also does not mean using the multi-wheel combination locks. Those are also pretty bad. They are attacked, by the way, and we're kind of glossing past this, with what's called a decoding. A sesame decode is one of the tactics used. The idea is you might not know exactly what's happening inside the lock with different mechanisms on the wheels, but if you can get the inner wheels lined up with themselves by means of a thin piece of metal. So here we see, let's say this is like a briefcase. You're slipping something down and you're finding the irregularity on each wheel. As long as the wheels themselves are now aligned, you can turn them in concert with each other, just trying each combination one after the next, one after the next, one after the next. And usually that's a pretty reliable way of eventually just hitting on the combination and popping it open. So combination-based locks, not always the easiest thing to make secure, either through shimming with metal, or this is a little mini knife that you would use in a decoding attack like that. Someone asked me about another style of combination lock that has shown up on the market. Has anyone ever seen a lock like this? So this is the Master 1500i, or speed dial. It is the silliest name ever because nothing is dialed in this lock. This is a button that can only go up or down or side to side. And the combination is a series of pushes of this button. It's a really interesting design. There's a series of gear wheels internally that all shift position based on the direction of push and the position they were in when the push came. So we call it the hash lock. It's like it performs a hashing function of your pushes. If you know someone is kind of geeky and has one, the main weakness is that it's usually up, up, down, down, left, right, left, right. That's the most popular combination on these. So that works on that one. There is an attack against it. There is a it involves a micrometer and measuring shackle travel very, very gently and then pushing up once, doing a lot of math. A German friend of ours, Michael Hubler, did a big write-up about this with beautiful designs, and I can show you later at the end some of his, just some of his animations of how this works internally. It's gorgeous research. But for a lock that costs all of $9, and it's about a 20-minute attack from the guy who invented the attack, that's not bad in my book. It's not shimmable. It's a cool conversation piece of a lock. I like that lock, honestly. I like it for mid-range stuff. We use it when we, go to the gym, which clearly I should do more often. How are you doing so far? Are there more questions? Are there more? Who's gotten like a lock open? Anybody got a 5 yet? Not Mark, but like somebody. All right, basic people. Is this your first time who got a 5? Amazing. You are picking like actual doors at this point. You are picking a conventional lock that would be on someone's door. And it's not the end of the world, frankly, because most people are generally pretty honest. Most people don't go around just popping locks open for the heck of it. But seeing what you saw earlier and seeing what you're trying now, it gives you the knowledge, hopefully, that if you wanted to make your locks a little better, it's not crazy expensive to do that. You can speak with a proper locksmith and say, hey, I would like this lock to be pinned up with some anti-pick pins. Or maybe you'd say, I'd like this lock to be resistant against bumping attacks. We haven't talked about bumping yet, but I would like to. Has anyone heard of bumping before? There should be some hands there. Very good. Bumping was known by locksmiths for a long time, and it really hit the news in kind of a big way in around 2005, 2006. A lot of brands of manufacturers started saying, oh, the bumpings, we will make our locks bump resistant. And, some of those worked and some of those didn't. Well, what is bumping? What is the bumping attack, or what is a bump key? A bump key is simply a specially cut key, usually with a series of very deep cuts that leave behind these little ridges, that will exploit basic principles of physics to pop a lock open very quickly. And if you keep getting locks, please, please keep coming up as we're talking about this stuff. Keep cycling your locks out. I want to see more people trying stuff. So what is this bump key going to do here? Well, if anyone remembers their high school physics class, Newtonian rules of motion. This cue ball is on the felt. Behind it, you got a 3 and a 2. If you shoot this cue ball, what's going to happen? Just shout it out. Describe to me what's going to happen. 2 is moving, the 3 is not. Transfer of motion right from one body to the next. That is what happens inside of a lock when someone uses a snapper gun, or sometimes erroneously called a pick gun. You sometimes see these, in like spy dramas, or you see them in the back of like Delta Press catalog and stuff. A snapping gun, or I wouldn't really call it a picking gun. The idea is this needle reaches in the lock, and when you pull the big handle and you release this pent-up smacking pressure, it punches the bottom of those pins. It smacks into the key pins, hopefully transferring energy up through to the driver pins. Hopefully just getting the driver pins to jump out of their plug, and you turn very quickly, just at the right moment. In my experience, it doesn't work out well. I don't like snapper guns. They're bulky, they're big, no one wants to carry them around. They make a hell of a noise. It's obvious you're doing something you shouldn't be doing when you have one. We don't use them a lot on pen tests. We do use bump keys, though. A bump key, which is just, again, a special key with little ridges. If you smack that into the lock, that's the bump happening. If you bump the key into the lock, you can smack into those key pins all simultaneously and hopefully jump those driver pins out of the plug just for a moment and flick the key almost at the same time the hit is coming. Some people will do this method, kind of the pulled method, where the key is pulled outward by one notch and then hit in. Other people, instead of this method, they will actually trim down the shoulder of their key, maybe even the tip as well. And that key can over-insert ever so slightly, and they will do what's called the push method or the minimal movement method. The principle of mechanics is the same in each case. We can try to do a little demo of that here. I've got my simple bump hammer, although any heavy blunt object will do. You see people do it with butter knives and screwdrivers. Here I have a bump key. You can see the low ridges, right? And this key does not operate this lock. It should never probably operate any lock. I mean, no key would be cut to this combination. But this is not the right key for this lock. If, however, and this is a negative shoulder or minimal movement, I've cut this key down, you can see it kind of springs into the lock a little further. If I give this key a little flick just at the same moment as I strike it with this bump hammer, it will hopefully open. Now, I don't want to be pushing on this key right now. Why not? Yes, they'll bind. You guys are paying attention. I'd be binding the very pins that I want to make them leap. So barely a whisper of pressure, just a little flick. It's a lot of hit and a little flick. How much hit? If you miss it, will hurt. We've seen news reporters trying to do bump key stories, and they're like, I bought these on eBay. It looks so easy. It's not working. Well, you're not hitting it hard enough. So you got to bang. There you go. That's it right there. No magic, no hocus pocus, just physics. This is not the key, but if I hit it, it is the key. Simple as that. This is fully populated, 5 or 6 pins, I believe. That's going to work in a lot of locks. We have a couple of bump keys. We have some tester locks if you want to try that at the next lights up break. There are friends of ours in Holland who documented this really heavily. Tool, the organization of which I'm very pleased to be a part, Tool was founded in the Netherlands, and they were one of the first people to really get on the news and tell people, hey, this is a risk, and it's not a risk just for cheap locks. Like you can see, these are some dimple locks. This is a pin within pin system dimple that you'll see later. ASA is a big brand. Dom, Eva is a beautiful lock manufacturer. They found it worked just as well with high quality locks as with cheap locks. It's not good for the locks. You probably shouldn't do this to your high quality locks. But it's also not hard to understand why it's going to work that way. It's also not hard to prevent. Again, a competent locksmith, a nice locksmith who is aware of this problem, which everyone is now. Locksmiths knew about this for a long time, but no one had really engineered a good fix. A locksmith can install what is known as an anti-bump driver pin. It's just a very low mass driver pin, almost looks like a little nail, and it is paired with a very high strength spring. So this high heavy strength spring, it doesn't mean that little nail kind of pin will never jump or move. It might bounce a little, but it will crest and fall back down before the other pins have even finished their ascent. It messes up with the timing. It actually completely screws up the timing in the lock. And if you populate a lock with even one of these in there, and that's what they look like. You can buy them in a parts catalog. Locksmiths can get these from Kava Ilko. They come in a bag of 10. And for very little cost, I mean, they cost about $1 or $2 each, you can populate a lock up. Here is a conventional pin tumbler lock, and it's a see-through housing, so you can see what I'm doing. Just like the kind of locks you're using, but I populated, a standard chamber, and now I'm putting this anti-bump pin in one chamber, pressing that down, some serrated driver pins. This would be a monstrous lock to pick. And it's not like I've reinvented the wheel here. So if you have a door or a facility that there's I really need some better security on this office, consider something like this. It's not going to run you 3 figures. We have plenty of amazing stories of high security locks that will, if you just need to know that no one could get in. Someone who's skilled enough could probably pick this. I don't think I honestly would. If I encountered a lock like this on the job, I would not try to really waste my time. It would take me a couple of hours and a lot of frustration and maybe some note-taking. I might get in. That's why we're going to get to the high security section in a minute. But it's absolutely, please go ahead, it's absolutely possible to make basic locks a lot better. And then in a minute, we'll get to the high security section as well. Can we hit the middle switch back there one more time, and we'll talk some more, and I want to see how people are doing. I'll send the bump keys around. What'd you get?
Number 1.
Right on. Open. Are you still having a good time so far? All right. How many people have gotten, I always keep asking around 4 or 5. How many people got a 4? How many people got a 5? And then of you, how many people, is this your first time trying this? That is so cool. That is so cool. So, did anybody get bumping to work? I saw a couple of people getting it. Nice. There's some hands. We still have more beer can metal or soda can metal or some other kind of whatever I was drinking. If you want to try shimming later, if you haven't tried that yet. My usual question, who's gotten a 4? Who's gotten a 5? That's a lot of you, man. This is so cool. Let's talk for a minute, as invariably people get curious. Let's talk about locks that simply cannot be opened with these basic attacks. Everybody has their own definition of high security, like what that word means. It's not an industry-defined term. For me, my definition is that high security locks require tools and techniques that are not like right off the rack, basic, you can get these for $30. Because the kit, like the picks you're all using, basic pick kits are out there, 15, 20, $30 online. They're all there. They're just basic. They're not complicated tools, and they'll apply to a broad range of locks. In my world, a high security lock requires special knowledge, special tactics, special tools, or is virtually impossible. Like this one, this twin style lock. If you've ever seen a lock that looks like 2 keys sandwiched together, that's often the design inside of something like this. You have conventional pin stacks working along with additional, usually very smaller pin stacks coming in from the side. Often they're interacting with what is known as a side bar. So running the entire length of the plug is this bar that will only fall inward if other conditions are met. This is, of course, from ASA. Again, this is a European model, the twin, the V10 twin. The American market does have from the Schlage company. Schlage, the Allegiant company, Schlage is their big brand. I mean, that is commercial locks in this country. Every every big business building you go into is probably going to have Schlage deadbolts and handle sets on all the doors. Schlage does have a product line called the Primus. The Primus is a double bitted lock. It is conventional bitting here, side cuts here, additional pins. We would sometimes call them finger pins coming in from the side, interacting with this sidebar along with the main typical pins up here. Is there no way to pick this? No, I wouldn't say that. I've seen it done. I've seen it bumped. I've seen a lot of things with a Schlage Primus, But almost always, they either had someone who had made some special tools for themselves, or they had some knowledge about the system. What do I mean the system? Well, a big building that has Schlage Primus on every door probably has different bitting cuts and different pins, because not everyone has the same key to their office. But many times the sidebar is shared throughout the whole system. So if you can compromise one lock, or if you're in a small enough area, if you get more lock, like if you find out who their locksmith is that's selling them these Primus locks, sometimes you can buy more Primus locks from that same dealer and try to get the sidebar code, because there's different levels of sidebar. Mark can probably speak more reliably about this than I, but I think it goes from like levels 1 through 8. In terms of like level 1 and level 1 plus is the national sidebar, just all over the Americas. If you are a small vendor and you say, hey, I've had this one customer asking me about Primus, and you contact Schlage, they'll say, yeah, we can sell you some Primus. You're getting level 1 because you don't want a big contract for resale. If you're a big, I'm going to sell nothing but Primus, I'm going to put it in all these buildings, you might get a higher level where they might give you your own unique sidebar code, or maybe a couple of sidebar codes. Or we're at Vegas every summer. We're out at Black Cat and Sands and other events. Most of the Caesars Entertainment properties have Primus on all the locks. I guarantee you, someone in the shop, probably in the basement of Harrah's, the old original house, is probably their in-house locksmith, and I bet you they have their own unique sidebar code for those properties. Doesn't mean you couldn't take one lock apart, read the sidebar code, and then know what it is. So there are some weaknesses, but for picking attacks, very robust. There's a very popular brand of lock in the U.S. called Medico. If you do any work with the government, you may have seen Medico locks. How do they work? They do have a sidebar. The key pin actually spins while it is lifted up and exposes a slot on the side of the plug for fingers of the sidebar to drop into. Here's what's happening there. The key pin is a special chiseled tip. It has grooves running down it. The keys themselves are cut at angles. It's a really interesting system. Here is a top view of a Medico plug. Those little black dots are the cuts in the key pins, and this is the sidebar removed. But you can see them oscillating and turning. It's a really cool idea. Does it mean that it's completely unpickable? No, it does not. There is a gentleman named Mark Tobias. He is a lock researcher and a security expert. He has published a number of books in the field of lockpicking and lock research and police research guides. Mark published a book just about attacking Medico locks. He had them in his crosshairs for years. And he and his partner Tobias Buzmanis published a number of attacks. And so you'll see, this is at LockCon. This was the final round with, this is Oliver Diedrichsen, and I think this gentleman is from Spain. I never remember his name. They are attacking Medico locks in this video. Oops, I just paused that. Now, can anyone do that? No. It's really hard. And they were using a series of specially cut keys to try to set the sidebar before picking the lock. But it's still possible. There's a very popular brand of lock called Multi-Lock. Also, these are all, I'm trying to focus on the American market, what you're likely to see here. Multi-Lock, it's originally an Israeli design. It's popular by a lot of locksmiths in the U.S. It is a dimple-style key, but it's pins within pins. So you have key pins inside of key pins, driver pins inside of driver pins. It's a telescoping pin system. Really neat idea. Very robust design. Have there been attacks against Multi-Lock? Yes, there have. This is the latest generation called the MT5. It has a series of sliders. There is a little slider groove running down the key. The only thing, we don't get into a lot of deep details that some of our NDAs don't allow us to say. I will say, and some of Sherry's students who saw this presentation before, they know what's coming, this gorgeous looking MT5, I can even pass an MT5 around if you want. You can play with it. You can see what it feels like in your hands. It's a neat idea as far as locks go. It's very well made. You can just hang out, pass it around, play with that. But there's this little tiny hole right here. That hole probably doesn't need to be there. And in fact, on later generations of the MT5, it's not there. Now, they didn't call it, it's not like the MT6. They just quietly don't have that hole anymore. It was a small security flaw. And it didn't completely compromise the lock, but it made it a lot easier to attack. And even like the electronic version, just because something looks newer doesn't mean it's newer. Like the click is Assa Abloy's electromechanical technology that they put in a lot of their cylinders. This is the MT5 click. Still has the hole. Like, they don't move as many click products off the shelf. So is this a problem? I don't know. I wouldn't think that someone's immediately attacking an MT5 Plus, but you never know. Just because something looks high security doesn't mean it's completely infallible. A whole different design of lock that doesn't use pins at all is the rotating disc system of locks. If you've ever seen a key that looks anything like this, some bike locks you may have seen with keys like this. The rotating disc system was very big, still is very big, in Scandinavia, all up in the Nordic countries. You see these there a ton. That's kind of the region where they originated. They almost worked like miniature safes inside. They're a series of wheels that all have to spin, exposing a grooved slot to a sidebar that wants to fall in. Are there manipulation tools? There are. They're different than conventional picks, but they exist. They're out there. I think they're a little harder to use, but maybe a Scandinavian person thinks these are easier to use, and our picks are hard because that's what they grew up with. There are some very restricted, very high-end tools that I only have fuzzy photos of that are just for attacking very high-end rotating disc locks. But there are certain products on the market that currently have, and one of them is a rotating disc, currently have what we would call no publicly known attack or bypass. And this one lock you're seeing a cutaway of, this is by the Abloy company, the Abloy ProTech lock. I love this design. It's, again, a series of miniature wheels, a series of sidebars. Ask me if you want more during some Q&A time. I can explain the Abloy ProTech a little better. But for reasons, essentially for math reasons, it is not possible to attack or manipulate this lock by any currently known system. I love this design, and I incorporate it in some of the padlocks I use. One other type of lock where there currently is no publicly known attack or bypass is a very high-end magnetic lock. Some locks have magnets embedded in the key. Miwa is a company from Japan that makes really nice magnetic locks, mid-range. I saw one on an apartment building once in New York. This is an Austrian one. This is the MCS by EVA, the magnetic code system. I should be really clear. I don't get free stuff or even T-shirts from any of these firms that I talk about. None of the ones that I crap on and none of the ones that I praise. I don't have any relationships with them other than, hey, I'm talking about your stuff again. Want to send me some free things? Nope. Okay, bye. So EVA makes the MCS. If you see the key, I mean, that's serious business looking key. And if I tell you there's magnets on the key, some people might presume, like, oh, it's got to be like, some arrangement of north-south, north-south, and probably consequently underneath on the other side must be the opposite. Many magnetic keys work that way. This does not. Those of you who know some EE background or some physics know that if you pass a conductive material, like a Gauss conductive material, through a coil, a charged coil, you can magnetize it. That's how you make a bar magnet, right? In the construction of the MCS, they pass discs through the charge coupler, and they actually magnetize them like this, assemble them with tiny rotors in the lock, so that the key itself, it's not simple north-south, north-south. It's discrete zones of magnetism helically around each pad of the key. It is a gorgeous design, so that each side of the key has one of 8 possible rotary positions in the 8 magnet pads. Do the math, permutations, large numbers. This is how it looks on the inside. These little rotor wheels all have to spin, aligning a gate that would normally be randomized. They line it all up, and now the sidebar can fall in. And that's sometimes in conjunction with other sliders or other passive elements on other sides of the key. It's a gorgeous system. Very expensive, but again, if you have like a server room and it's thousands upon thousands of records in that room, or if you have a collection of, I have a huge collection of firearms, I'm going to spend possibly $300-400 on a lock or a safe if I can leave my attacker no avenue of covert entry. I would argue that the server room is way scarier of a breach than like my gun safe. Someone gets into my gun, you know what, so there's guns, I'm pissed that I don't have them, but like there's plenty of guns that criminals have on the streets. They're going to do what they do. The idea of someone covertly getting into the server room and then, what's the second half of that? Getting out again without you knowing, that's the scariest kind of entry. That's why these sort of unbreakable or, you know, no known attacker bypass systems have merit, even if there's glass on the front of the server room. Were there any, did any of those, have you ever seen any of those in use? Maybe some of you might have seen some multi-lock somewhere. Anybody seen a multi-lock in the U.S.? One hand in the back. Medico? Anybody? Fed? Army? Yeah, Medico is kind of popular. You never see the Obloy, you never see MCS, you just don't see them here. There's one vendor that sells them in the U.S. market. It's a friend of ours. His name is Mitch. Mitch is based in Washington State. He runs a site called Security Snobs. And if you really just really want one of these crazy European locks, he works with a friend of ours in Holland to import them. And he doesn't give me anything free for saying that. He's a nice dude. He's the sweetest guy ever. And I'm glad that he tries to, you know, sell some interesting stuff. Now, I showed you all the high security. Let's drop it back down to some crazy low security problems. Because we talked a little bit during shimming about bypassing, right? Let's talk about one of my favorite bypassing stories. The story of the American padlock. Not like America, but like the brand, American Lock. And they are an American firm. Like they're a really nice firm. They've since been acquired by Master Lock, who now owns them, and is slowly phasing out the American brand name. You don't see it on shelves as much. American Lock used to be like the lock on city streets at night. You know, if the cladding comes, well, not in this town. You guys are a nice town, but I'm from Philadelphia. So like the big storefronts, they come down at night, and then these big, like these were the locks you would see on storefronts. Now they are a double ball mechanism, hardened shackle. They even have brass and other metals in the shackle to prevent oxidizing flame cutting. Double ball mechanism, we have the control cylinder here, the cams, you know, cuts here. Married up against this is the core, which is a removable core. It's ejectable if you have to rekey it. The core touching here, little half circle, little quarter circle. I can show you the actual parts, which are right here. So here's the core, here's the control cylinder, here's one of the ball bearings. That is all of what's inside an American padlock. And that's a smaller version of the big model. Now, someone created this. It looks like a lockpick. It is not a lockpick. This is a bypass tool or a bypass driver just for this padlock. How does it work? Well, if this is your core, and this is the front of the keyway, right? The keyway, as almost all keyways are, and the plug is cut all the way through to the rear of the plug. So this is the rear side of the keyway, which again, this would normally be touching up against here. So this tool, which is not a lockpick, it does not manipulate the pins. It goes in the other way around. It goes all the way through the keyway. If I can line up and you can, I want you to actually see how I'm going down the keyway here. You can push it straight through. Darn, I'm a little stiff on this one. Essentially, you can push it straight through and just flick right at the tail side. You can just flick that control cylinder open. Well, again, why mess with the pins if you don't have to? Here is a proper, you know, American padlock. I can stick it now. I'm not pushing it up into the pins. I'm down away from the pins, straight through. And that attack worked on the giant model, the mid, worked on all the different models. That is a classic, you know, just case of bypassing. Go around the lock. And there's a great, we'll loop back to that at the end. I love concluding with the second half of that story. Other kinds of bypassing, door latch bypassing is huge. Like, I used to grow up watching Bill Cosby and Robert, what was his name? Robert, in I Spy, remember that show? And they would like credit card doors open and stuff. People shaking their heads, you're so young, I'm old. But the idea of using thin tools, thin hooks or little thin spikes to just push in to a door frame and slip the latch out of the way, that's still a valid attack on plenty of doors. Here's a locked door. Oops. That works. Modern doors should prevent that. They should be what are called anti-loiding or anti-thrust. If you're curious, the term lloyding, which locksmiths will know that term, it refers to way back in the 40s and 50s, celluloid was used. They would use this flexible but stiff celluloid to slip into the door frame and try to push the plunger or the latch out of the way. Modern doors should be resistant to that kind of attack. Many of them are not, mostly because of misinstallation, poor door fitment, just poor product choice. You can find these on a red tee, but like, I will walk through your building, point all this stuff out, scare you, and then I'll be like, now, you ready to fix this? You might be spending $45 to fix that door. It's not a lot of money to fix this kind of problem. It's also not a lot of money to fix this. This door is locked. This door is suddenly unlocked. What happened? That door had a passive exit system, a request to exit system tied to its infrared beams. Take a can of spray air or spray duster, flip it upside down, like I used to do to scare the cats when they were getting into something I didn't want them to do. A giant cloud of cold air. A lot of these sensors don't know the difference between a human who's warm and cold. They just see temperature differential. That door's open. This is real simple stuff to mitigate if you understand how to change your sensors positionally or how to change the logic and how they work, or just in your secure environments, use a push-to-exit button. There's a whole lot we could get into, but understand that these vectors of attack are usually what I'm using on a pen test. I'm not picking most doors. I'll go back around and we'll document some picking and put it in the report to show the client, yes, this lock brand is probably vulnerable, but most of the time we are bypassing our way through everything, getting in easily, and all because people are not using locks that are resistant to covert entry. The way I love to try to make people think about this, and we've been touching on this every time tonight, I keep coming back to it. These are very nice locks, off the shelf. You might call all three of these, quote, high security locks. I probably wouldn't. This Master Pro Series is probably about a $45 lock. Everything I've taught you today, you could get into this lock, probably. It might take you a while. It's got some anti-pick pins. It's got some heavy springs. But you could use these basic tools in front of you and the tactics you've learned tonight. You could get that open. Or, conversely, an attacker could get that open. If you had a bunch of valuable stuff in a storage unit and you locked it up with this and you came back to the storage unit and it's still there, do you know nobody's been in there? Not with this lock, personally. This Abbas lock, Abbas is a German brand. This is a rotating disc system, the granite lock. You could get that open with a very hard-to-attain tool and very specialized training. I have not, covered rotating disc manipulation tonight because, frankly, we don't have the time to get into it. Our advanced training covers it. We do it for the government stuff. But again, is that a better lock than this first one? I don't know. I mean, it costs a heck of a lot more. It's like €150, but it's way more resistant. The last lock on the end, that's the Obloit ProTech of which I spoke. There are no known attacks or bypasses. Again, you're paying a little more. That's probably about a $250, $300 lock. That's their biggest version. But is your peace of mind worth an extra $65, $100, depending on the installation? Are you guarding against covert entry or brute force entry? It's all a rich tapestry, right? Every situation is different. But understanding that some locks have a purpose beyond just, your key in the door. Again, the glass door, oh my gosh, someone could throw a brick through this door. Or my luggage. When I travel with my Peli cases, whenever I fly, I have Obloy locks on them. They're the tiny out. You can get a tiny Obloy lock. It's like $30. And I put one on each side. And people say, those are so small, someone could cut them, you could break the case open. Yeah, that's happened to me once. Somebody cut the locks. I knew that it happened. I knew it the instant my luggage came out of the belly of the airport. And conversely, every time, and she'll tell you I fly way more than I wish I did these days, every time I get off the plane and I pick up the bags, as soon as I see the Obloy locks dangling from my luggage, I know, in my heart, I know nobody's been in the luggage. Because the only way they could get in is by destroying the lock. Are Obloy locks impenetrable? Not completely. This is a drill bit, just called a ProTech heater. Mr. Wendt from Germany makes this, and the idea is you can carve exactly the right size out and pull the disc pack out, and then you can operate the lock, like with a screwdriver. Now, is that a condemnation of Obloy? No, in my opinion. enough like super heavy carbide steel, enough metal and power will get through anything. But that's obviously a lock that somebody messed with. If you come in on Monday and your glass is still glass and your lock does not look like that, you know no one's been in there. So that's what we like to summarize. That's what we like to always keep you thinking about. In the real world, when you're facing most attackers with brute force and all these are like neighborhood watch kind of advising. Keep your doors, screwed in correctly. Don't let anybody smash their way in. But in the business world, if you use the right lock at the right time, you are really guarding yourself against any kind of covert entry. This is it's a hilarious scene in a movie called Red. And they see, she's saying, oh, can you get in? Did you get the code? And he said, no, it changes every 6 hours. No one can get in. So he kicks through the drywall. Right? It's unbreakable. The lock. But, of course, he pops it open. But the principle remains, like, they got in, but 5 minutes later, a guard should be seeing this and setting off alarms and everything else. So in my opinion, it's great cinema, but that lock works. You've denied the attacker covert access. You force the attacker to be overt in their technique. That's what it's about. If we're not throwing you out when I show you, we're concluding here. We're going to keep hanging out as long as you want. But if you want to learn more, how many people had fun tonight? Excellent. If you want to learn more, I finally put my friggin' books on the slides. I always don't like talking about myself, whatever. There's plenty of videos online. There's tons of presentations that we've given and other people like us have given. You can just Google or look on YouTube for lockpicking for a lot of this stuff. Take it with a grain of salt. Not everything you see is completely accurate, but a lot of this knowledge is out there. Every talk I ever give about lockpicking, if I have it recorded, I throw it up online and you can just watch it later. If you want to get into sport picking, there are lots of tool chapters. There are lots of chapters of other lock sport groups. None in Montana yet, maybe. Let us know at the end of this if you really want to have like a monthly meeting. Maybe we'll start a tool chapter in Montana. That would be fun. If you're curious about the legality of picks, every state you see in green, picks are legal. If you've heard that picks are not legal in your state, you are probably being given bad information. There are only 4 states that appear in yellow on this map. They are Mississippi, Ohio, Virginia, and Nevada. They are still rather legal there. Just ask me what the question mark is. The only other state, Tennessee, appears in amber. Still kind of legal there. Ask me later if you happen to be visiting those states a lot. I'll explain why these colors are these colors. So to conclude, right, we had a bunch of jokes early on, like people think that lockpicking is this shady field, and people think that lockpickers are scary. But for the most part, I come up and I like to talk about this because we're not. We're regular people. People who are interested in locks are people like me and you. We're young and old. We're men and women. We're just people from all different walks of life. The lock sport community is growing more and more in this country, and people are learning that it's not I heard it open. People are learning it's not like this nefarious art that no one should talk about. It's perfectly fun. It's just like any sort of, if your kid's learning martial arts, or if you learn to use firearms, like people will say, oh, you're going to attack people. No, dummy. Like, this is fun stuff. It's good knowledge. It's self-discipline. And it's this community where people compete and there's camaraderie and the competition is serious and everyone's friendly at the end. I love being a part of this world. And I love sharing this world with other people. And if you have, actual business concerns or real concerns about security, remember that by participating in talks like this and sharing knowledge like this, you're helping people be more secure. Not only are you more well-versed and able to make better decisions, like when you go to Home Depot, but remember that bypass driver, right? So American Lock, much to their credit, did not respond by trying to sue like the manufacturer of this tool. This is a guy named Ken who made this tool. And American Lock didn't try to be like, no, this is all fake, and issue press releases. American Lock was like, shit, well, this is no good. So they started making this little punched piece of metal they called a security wafer. And they would say, all right, eject your core, put it on the lock, and like reassemble. It's a disassemblable lock. And new locks are shipping from American with that little security wafer. And they said it's literally like if you're a computer person, it's like a patch. It's like it's Tuesday, right? They're like, download this, boom, there you go. So you're secure. So what did Ken do? Ken Pearson, who runs Peterson Tools, he was like, I see what you did there, American Lock. And he went to his lab and he's like, new but package pricing. You can buy the bypass tool at this. Well, what is this? This is a wafer breaker set. And you twist and you punch and you spread and you bang, and it punches a hole exactly where you need it in the wafer. And the end result of this, though, is not that the sky is falling and, oh my God, isn't everything horrible. American Lock looked at this, looked at their designs, talked together. They said, all right, we're not solving this problem with 10 cents worth of stamped steel. And American Lock redesigned their whole system. They still sell like conventional padlocks. But the big product now, and the one that everyone started moving to, is the hockey puck, the shackleless padlock. This was the American 2000, one of the earliest locks to do this. There is no shackle, there is no control cylinder, it's a whole different design. The bypass doesn't work on it. Most picking is really hard on it. They use really aggressive pins. And because people like Ken created that bypass attack, and because people like us share knowledge and talk about it, exposing bad security drives the industry in a healthier direction, and it drives the consumer in a better direction. And by talking about things that some people think are scary, you're actually doing the most you can to make people's lives safer. And I thank you for listening. I thank you for being a part of this, and I'll hang out for a while. Thank you very much. Question in the back. Here, we can pop the lights, and we'll do some questions. And yes, question in the back, sir. So the gentleman says when he goes to the airport, the TSA does not usually care for locks on his luggage. Certainly not locks like you saw in mine. Your luggage probably does not have a firearm in every case. So that is the reason why. I fly with a firearm in every single checked bag I ever check. And because of that, you are not just allowed, you are required to use a non-TSA proper padlock. There was a talk I gave, I want to say at DEF CON 18, called Packing in the Friendly Skies. Search for flying with firearms, like on YouTube. I talk all about it. I talk about every airline, all the policies. It's simple to do. If you are flying, like we both grew up in New Jersey, not a gun-friendly state. If you're flying back to the Garden State, flare gun. Flare gun is 50 state legal, 50 states, no permits of any kind, and it is a firearm. It expels a projectile by means of combustible propellant. You put a flare gun in your luggage. You are allowed, in fact required, to proper lock it hard up. I usually just have like my 1911 or my M9 or something in there. But yeah, you can do what you want. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yes, very good. And you had a hand.
What is that name of your comic?
Oh, so that was the comics. It's really neat. There's a fella in India. His name is Rock, and he created a site called HackerStrip. So he reached out to people in the tech community and said, "Tell me cool stories about jobs you've pulled and things you've done." And he just like rendered this amazing comic strip, and I wrote the script with him, and he's beautiful drawings, and my team loved it. And he's probably put about 7 or 8 issues out of different people, all different, like Jason Street's in one, Charlie Miller doing auto hacking. It's just really, really cool to see. And he eventually, he's this guy who just wants to sell a book one day. He's like, tech community, you guys got a lot of discretionary income. I'll sell stories about yourself to yourselves. But I loved it. Like, if you guys have a team of individuals that you've done cool research, like, reach out to the people at HackerStrip. They always want stories. And then you could be immortalized and e-ink. Any other questions? Anything you did not get to try, including beer and pizza, which there probably is still somewhere? Yes, question in the back.
Well, I think one of your talks also heard that if you suspect that somebody's picked a lock, you guys come in and verify if yes, that's been done.
Yes.
That does leave a few marks.
So Tom was asking, and while I'm answering that, I'll try to flip up to it. Tom was asking, if you think a lock has been attacked, can you, what do you do? There are whole fields and whole specialists, and, we have folk on the team who basically specialize in what is called lockpicking forensics, or forensic locksmithing. There we go. A lock will reliably and repeatedly be touched by certain, pieces of the lock will be touched by a key over time when you're, want to hit the middle switch again? When you're using a lock day in and day out. There's my mouse. There we go. So that'll have certain effects. That'll do things like the pins. Those will get polished, essentially, by the key over time. So a brand new pin manufactured with these sort of concentric rings, they will tend to polish out, polish out, polish out. Other things in the lock will leave little traces of oil and debris and deposits. But where you start getting interesting data has to do with picking. Picking will touch places that a normal, key would never touch. You'll start to get scrapes that don't belong there. It will also leave scrapes and very noticeable marks on the bottom of the pins. So these are actual, forensic imagery that we've had. One of our fellows, Datagram, he does testimony in court over this is raking, this is picking, this lock has been attacked, this lock was attacked by an idiot, that kind of thing. So yes, there's a whole field just about forensics, and it's a very specialized field. It's not just going to, your corner locksmith. Your corner locksmith is getting the new lock in and doing a good job of it. A specialist is taking images like that and maybe talking to an insurance company. We've had, you have a break-in. Oh my God, the stuff's gone. And you call the insurer and you say, oh, we had a break-in. And they say, okay, we'll send somebody right out to document the photos of the broken door. And you say, well, no, it wasn't a door. And you say, well, we'll document the window. And you say, no, it wasn't a window. They picked in. They use lockpicks, and the insurance companies will say, sure they did, tell me another one. You have bad key control. You had a rogue employee. You had blah, 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 blah. You didn't lock up. And people have had to go to court. We're talking about, 5-6-figure payouts, and they've gone to court. And in pretrial discovery, when somebody turns over this sort of imagery, it says, well, this is what we're preparing to testify to. Insurance firms will say, we drop our objection, whatever. Here's your check. So it's real money at stake sometimes. And, talk to us later about preservation of a chain of evidence. And as anybody who works with LMG knows, it's not just can you document the evidence, it's can you document it in a verifiable way that it is literally evidence as submissible in court. So hopefully that answered that question. That was a little bit long. Anyone else? We can hit that middle switch again.
Great.
Yes.
I'm not sure if you covered it or not, but why do the European locks seem so much more advanced?
Oh, very good. So the question is, why are European locks sort of seemingly more advanced? More than anything, it is a problem of standards. In Europe, many locks are rated by insurance companies and the police, and you will get cuts on your insurance premiums and this and that if you use a certain rating of lock. In the U.S., we do have lock standards. They are almost all industry-led. So the builders, the VHFTMA, Builders Manufacturers Trade Association, and ANSI has a standard. Virtually all of those standards are wear and tear, so how many uses until fail, or brute force resistance. Drilling, wrenching, cracking. For the years, they didn't have a standard that addressed bumping, and bumping was known for ages. They've added language, but I think it's dumb. The language says, a lock is ANSI grade 1 if it can resist bumping for 15 minutes. Do you know how bumping works? It either is or isn't going to work. It's not a 15-minute attack. I don't get how that language was developed, but I don't write standard documents. That's mostly what I think it's a problem of standards and public education. And it's also kind of interesting to me, and this is where you get a little tear in the eye about our country. As we watch, I'll get political for a second. As we watch our freedoms crumble away, we're still not the same thing as an unfree country in Europe. In parts of the world where France, France has a really Fichet makes gorgeous locks. That's their big brand in France, and their highest lock is the F3D. Amazing, intricate system, hundreds of euros. And I asked somebody once at LockCon. I asked my buddy Alex. I'm like, so who the frig buys this? What is it? This doesn't even. It's so huge, it doesn't even fit in a normal door. You have to buy a heavy door. And I was like, is this for server? Who puts this on their house? He's like, oh, a lot of people. And I said, why? Why is that? He said, well, Deviant, you like to, bitch about law enforcement and other problems in your country, but if you have a problem, chances are you're probably calling the police. We live in a country where, within our parents' own generation, some of them, or our grandparents, the police and the government were the ones coming for you. And there's this culture of much greater distrust and much greater guardedness of your private property in Europe, which is strange when you think about how a lot of their social networks are. But I think that's a part of it too. It's a very different culture. And the Germans and the Swiss are a culture of engineering, so their locks are just very intricate. We were a culture of mass-produced goods. That's I should have a bourbon in my hand. I could just talk about that kind of shit all night. But hopefully that's kind of addresses that slightly. Yes. Other questions? Everyone's just diligently away. Everyone probably has somewhere to go, and they're like, we want to feel like it's time to leave. If you want to head out, you can keep playing, you can stick around, you can do whatever you want to do. But I'm gonna stick around here for a little while longer. Thank you so much for being here.